During World War II, the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, shook the world. This led the American government to issue Executive Order 9066, which authorized the relocation of any people from the West Coast who were deemed a threat to national security. This caused for both the Issei and Nisei to be relocated into camps that were referred to as internment camps. Throughout World War II, the Japanese Americans stayed in the internment camps until the war was almost over in the year 1945. During the Japanese Americans' time in internment, their rights were taken away slowly through the Executive Order 9066, internment, and even redress. Executive Order 9066, issued on February 19, 1942, was an order that had changed the Japanese's fate and freedom for life. EO 9066 was the order that made it legal for the military to relocate 110,000 Japanese into internment camps, away from the West Coast. During relocation, the Japanese had to leave everything that they could not carry behind. Most Japanese Americans had to sell their cars, houses, miscellaneous items, and if they had businesses, they had to sell that too. Most of the time, they sold their things at a lower price than what they had bought it for, either through the government or other people. During relocation, most of the Japanese Americans had to temporarily live in assembly centers, at stockyards, fairgrounds, and racetracks until they were assigned one of the 10 internment camps, not including the ones in Hawaii. This not only impeded on the Japanese's rights, but also affected how the Japanese Americans lived, which was not just of the government. At the time of their internment, the internees were living in makeshift barracks while the whole camp was surrounded with barbed wire fences. In the barracks held the only things that they could carry by hand. Most of the time there would be more than one family placed in one barrack, which is to say that they did not allow for privacy. Sometimes families were separated for various reasons. Even though they had schools for the little children, they had inadequate medical care, which caused deaths of Japanese American internees. Not only were the conditions of the camp an issue, but so was the location. The camps were in isolated places, which had temperatures ranging from 25 degrees to 115 degrees throughout the year. In the internment camp, surrounded by barbed wire fences, preventing the Japanese Americans from escaping was a severe violation of rights. Many Japanese were affected by this event for the worse. In the year 1945, the war was close to an end, which meant that the Japanese Americans were released from their internment camps. On the year 1948, the U.S. government was said to have given Japanese Americans a total of $37 million in reparations. But it was proven that it was not enough because most of the Japanese families had no home to go back to. 40 years later, the U.S. government realized that they had done an injustice to the Japanese community. So, on the year 1988, the U.S. government passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which gave $20,000 in reparations to all living Japanese internees. Even with the redress, the Japanese were barely compensated for what they had lost in the end. The unfair treatment of the Japanese and their rights was a horrible act that was caused by the American government. Not only were they taken away from their homes, but they were unfairly treated during the internment and were not fully compensated during the redress.